All right, we're back, Film Family, with Mikiech Nichols. Mikiech is a filmmaker, writer, director. We're going to be talking about Moron. Mikiech, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Mikiech, can you take a minute and introduce yourself as a filmmaker and then set up the film?
Yeah, sure. Basically, I started getting into filmmaking at a pretty young age. I wrote my first screenplay when I was like in fifth grade, and then got to actually start making movies when I turned 13 and could borrow a camera from my uncle, and I would spend every single weekend available forcing my friends to be in all of my movies. And by the time I was in my 20s, luckily I'd established myself in a cool little film community in Bellingham, Washington. And that kind of grew and grew. And then I pieced out of that place, moved to Seattle, and basically started focusing more on music and made a lot of musician friends until finally one day I decided I'm 30 years old. I need to make a feature film, something that I've wanted to do for my entire life. And so I started writing slowly something that was very autobiographical. And in the meantime, I met some other people who had been wanting to write and make movies of their own, but they didn't know anybody. So we kind of started collaborating together, and slowly over the course of the next year, that's how we developed this short film, Moron. So it was a melding of both of our creative ideas and influences, and then from there, I've just kind of stuck with filmmaking and spent 5 years making that first feature, and here I am today.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Thank you. That is a great synopsis. Really interesting that you took a break for a while doing music. I mean, music's pretty fun and cool and a real experiential process, as you're creating the music and performing it. So, which is something that it has in common with filmmaking, of course, in a different way. Filmmaking, you're on set, writing, there's different experiences that you're having. This film, Moron, can you set it up?
It's a short. It's kind of a one night. What happens in the middle of the night. This sort of like small odyssey, little journey of a character who really just wants to um, be seen romantically by one of his coworkers, and he has a terrible understanding of what it means to like properly pursue someone. He doesn't take social cues very well at all, and he kind of does all the wrong things in an effort to get to see this person in the middle of the night.
Okay, that's great. And I love how you set it up as a director in terms of a character and what they want, and then their process that they go on in their journey. And so I'm going to just kind of flesh it out. From what I saw Moron. First, we got to talk about the title. Moron is like synonymous with idiot and just a extremely unintelligent person. Let's just put it that way, right? And that's
Yeah.
what we have here. We have an entire it's a very kind of DIY punk rocky. I'm sure there's a genre that I don't know well enough of this type of film, which places itself in this absurdist universe where it's a very aggressive film from the perspective of the hyperbolic characterizations, over characterizations, these like satirical gestures that all these characters are, right? And it's, as I'm watching it and breaking it down, and you have this kind of earnesty moron who seeks connection, doesn't know how to do it, and he starts off with the premise, well, what is cool? I've got to be
Yeah.
cool, right? And that's so like germane to culture, American culture, current culture, international, whatever, but let's localize it in America. And it's that's the big kind of almost existential question, especially at a certain age, and a certain age of these characters, right? They're facing, how do I navigate the world in a cool way to get what I want? And so you've got then like completely insensitive characters. Like all of them are just totally and it paints this world where you've got like if you ask, well, what is the artist saying? What is the artist experiencing or what's going on? And it's like, well, if you're born into a callous society where you're trying to navigate it based on superficiality, it's
Mhm.
going to it's not going to go well. And so at the end of the movie, the guy is slumped in this, sort of desperate state of kind of post pre-adolescent adulthood, whatever it is. I mean, it ranges all kind of ages, but into deep depression where his trial to win the girl fails. He shot himself before he even got out of the gate. And then here he is trying to do this grand romantic gesture that's completely misguided at the least and or at the best, and then he returns home to a very cold and callous environment where there is someone at home, but they're totally checked out. And that's actually my favorite part, is the kind of juxtaposition between the music, the keyboard,
Yeah.
that magazine, the pornographic magazine being on the keyboard, that stand where the father is, and he asks him how his day was, and he lies to him, and then he goes outside, and there he is all alone in this, again, this kind of self-despairing emotion, which is kind of a surrogate self-love, right? It's not real love, like self-love, like care or self-care that we
Yeah.
learn as adults to have to manage, but a real kind of just um wallowing in our suffering, right? So
Yeah.
how do I do? Would you model that, Clay, for me at all?
I mean, you did a great job. Yeah, that gets. I mean, that was really good.
Thank you.
The writers Noah and David, who David was the lead actor that played Trevor in the movie, and you know, they have a very specific interest in like those types of characters and these characters that are over the top, kind of satirical in whatever type of character that is, and they tend to really like the idea of them almost living in their own world. It's like parallel to whatever our reality is. It's a heightened version of sometimes the worst parts of our reality. My approach was really from a lot of the technical aspects, like how do we bring that to life on a like a micro budget. I think we spent maybe $100 on that, not including like gas. And I had gotten to know them when me and a friend were hosting trivia nights every week, and I always had these very like I tried to fit in a couple like movie questions that were very obscure, and they would nail those questions, the answers to those questions every single time. And so that intrigued me. And so then we just kind of started talking, and I realized that we had such a commonality in our film interests, which is just kind of vast, but also really enjoying like weird stuff. Like, quote, obviously for me, David Lynch is a huge influence
Yeah,
in that
sure.
regard.
Yeah.
Yeah, but beyond that too, like, Alejandro Jodorowsky, and then even getting into just like kind of like the trashier stuff too, Cannibal Holocaust and things like that. Um, just having this interest. And my goal was to reinterpret what they had on paper, which in a way I think it was definitely supposed to be a comedy, but I felt like I was really way more tapped into the nightmarish elements of it.
Yeah.
Again, like Trevor making kind of all the wrong decisions and trying to like make the world feel more like the world around him feel like it's a bad place. You know?
Mhm.
He's manifesting his bad decisions, right, by making them. And then I wanted to put that out into the world, so to speak, for Trevor.
Because that's what I want to tap into. I mean, I want to tap into what's in your head,
Yeah.
right? What's
Yeah.
in your head that you connect to that genre of weird and
Mhm.
this particular script. So Trevor,
Yeah.
right? Trevor is a loser on,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So what is it that connects you to the loser, to the weird, and to the universe in Moron, which is despair
Yeah.
and hopeless?
I mean, I think that's it. Because like I said, when we first started talking about it, me and the two writers, I think the first draft was, probably like 6 pages or something like that, um, and it was I felt like what I was seeing in it that I don't think was there in my memory was just that the real desperation and just like tapping into I didn't want to make this movie and make it feel like I was I thought Trevor was making any right decision at all. And I felt like what I could bring to it was that mood and that tone. And I don't think that tone was there in the script. And when I read it, that's what I saw.
That's what I want to go there and get to know you better and
Okay.
understand your history better and
Yeah.
what motivated you to see what you saw the way you saw it and then to invest in rendering it the way you did. You know, that investment, where is that investment coming from? I mean, did your dog get run over at age 5? Did were you the weird kid sniffing glue? I mean, like where does that coming from?
Oh man. Yeah. Uh yeah, like it's a little bit some of it's a little it's removal in a sense because I think ever since I was a kid, I've always really found interest in like dark stuff, uncomfortable stuff. I dealt with like nightmares a lot when I was a kid, and my older sibling just watched horror movies all the time and would make me watch them with them. But I was also so, drawn to making people laugh, and probably as a way to deal with like being the tiny kid like in elementary school, like I don't want to get beat up, so if I can make you laugh, then we're good. So there's a little bit of that, and I think at some point it just kind of like mixed together. And then
Mm.
as I got older, I started realizing that a lot of people have kind of struggle with feeling uncomfortable or being grossed out and being the struggle with being able to like connect that also with humor and having a good time. And I just think you can do both at the same time. And so finding ways to feel uncomfortable and laugh at the same time was just something that I've always kind of
Mm.
tried to find, and
Mm.
sometimes in a more lighthearted way, and sometimes in a more like grotesque way. But I'm always kind of like trying to marry those things in
Oh,
some
see,
regard.
I love that. Thank you, because that gives me so much understanding of, and I think the audience, because this is what, it's like, yeah, let's talk about films, whatever, but it's like that's fine. But what's more important is let's talk about how we live our lives and how others
Mhm.
can improve the quality of their lives through our own experiences. What do we have to share? And to me,
Yeah,
what that shares is that you have dealt with pain in your own life, whether it's horror and being exposed to things that you're not ready for
yeah,
psychologically. You know, there's a
yeah.
there's an Indian term called samskara. Have you ever heard of that?
So, like,
Samskara?
yeah, yeah. I got really into like Buddhism and
Yes.
Hinduism for a while, and
Yes.
yeah, mm,
Yeah, so it's a scar, a visual scar, a memory scar. It's
mm,
just this trauma. And so between that and then being the smaller kid, which I was too, always still am, and
yeah,
you know, navigating the world, with that and having to find your place in it, you're able to deal with challenges through this combination of bringing humor to horror. Wow, what a survival mechanism.
yeah. As we're talking. I'm just thinking, yeah, like there's a lot of like depression that runs in my family, and I was around a lot of really intense stuff because of that when I was a kid, and was right there alongside, especially with my older sibling, and I think that made me understanding and interested and always keeping close to other people that I met for better or worse throughout my life, that were struggling with, really intense depression and things of that nature. And yeah, I think that is totally connected to that. Just kind of always trying to be able to find humor, but be connected to the darkness that so many of us deal with all the time, and not, I can't force somebody else to feel comfortable about something that they don't feel comfortable with, but I think helping to put it out there and make it feel more normalized is important.
It's huge, dude. I mean, on a spiritual level, what you're doing in the context that I understand it and live my life is you are making suffering grace. How do you make suffering grace? How do you turn the unbearable horror in the entire world and turn that into something that can elevate your own um, being? How can
Hmm.
you still be a human and deal and face with the suffering that's out there? And how can you still see the world through the eyes of love at the same time?
Yeah, totally. And with, with Moron, like most all of us will agree that, Trevor is not the smartest tool in the shed. But at the end of the day, even though he made some bad decisions, we kind of can still sympathize at the very least and get that brief understanding. The same deal with like that final scene with his dad when he comes home. To me, that makes everything else make more sense about who he is as a character and why he has a bad understanding of what like a romantic relationship or romantic gesture even looks like. The way the title hits really big right at the end, Moron, feels like this punchline, like this stamp on him. But at the same time, the last moment that we saw him is him at his worst and ideally the most sympathetic too. And so hopefully you get both uncomfortable emotions at the same time.
I think the reason the character is most sympathetic, as you mentioned at that time, is he's most real,
Yeah, yeah.
right? He's the most
Even as he's
real.
lying, he's the most real. Yeah.
And especially when he walks out the door and breaks down in the face of
Uh-huh.
his own, seeing his entire actions that he's
Yeah, and
led him
still
to.
puts his mask right back on, before he can even let himself go.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, the real theme of how is it that we as humans can learn from our mistakes and not put that mask back on.
Yeah, I
That's
don't know.
come
I don't know.
on.
Yeah.
Well,
And
that
especially these days too, I think it's very important because, we're all like being confronted with the fact that like we've all done dumb stuff, and we will continue to do dumb stuff, because that is how we grow, from the moment you come out of the womb or however, and till the time you're no longer with us anymore. I think we make mistakes and we're going to continue to make mistakes, and some mistakes are bigger than other ones and harder to forgive. But I think that we all have to like remember that mistakes are natural and a part of living and learning and growing and progressing.
definitely, and that's certainly a value, and that helps take off the mask a little bit, loosen up the strings of it. I think growth is possible, and I think the kind of the gravity of the mistakes that we make as we age can become less intense.
Yeah.
I think there is something for wisdom and acquiring wisdom, and you're in a particularly unique position. There's not a lot of people named Mikish, and it's a beautiful name,
Thanks.
and you've had to own that, and then you go beyond the name too, right? Beyond the form of the name. So here we are, and as you're leading your life, we've just met. We've never hung out before,
Hmm.
and are having a very candid conversation, that we're going to broadcast to whoever would like
Yeah.
to check it out,
Yeah.
and it takes a certain amount of courage to do that. And that's what, the process of cultivating one's own artisthood is
Mm.
you got to be brave, right? You got to step
Yeah.
out and you've got to be able to feel.
Yeah.
So here we are wrapping up the interview, exploring the themes and trying to, learn from Trevor and how we not put on the mask. And one of the things that I see that this movie, the narrative is telling us how we can do that is how not to do that is to change what our premise, what is our driving premise? Is am I going to be cool? Do I need to think of what is cool? How do I act cool right now?
Right.
Or is there another driving premise that can lead us to another outcome?
Yeah, I hope that, people do take exactly that away from it, Hopefully I don't know. I think it's important to be reflective and, look at why we do the things that we do. And I think it's easy to watch the movie and be like, I'm not Trevor, that's a bad decision. I would never do that. But hopefully instead people will watch it and think that is a dumb decision. Would I do that? Or could I ever do that given the circumstances? Or have I ever done something like that? And just reevaluate the way we look at others and judge others.
I love that. Thank you, Mikish.
Yeah.
All right, my friend Mikish Nichols, filmmaker, writer, director, editor on Moron. You also just recently put out a feature, I think,
Yeah, yeah, I spent like 5 years making my first feature called Mountainside. Got released technically it was 2023, kind of the end of 2023.
or we'll
Yeah.
throw some links out and we'll let the
Yeah.
people know how to, see more of you. Thank you so much for being on the show today, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Thanks so much for having me. This has been great.
Awesome. Thank you, Mikish. All right, everybody, play it forward. We're out till next time. Party on and make love, not war.